Howdy. This is Lemmy with RevZilla, joined by Spurgeon and Joe Zito. You're watching High Side, Low Side, and today we have an episode. Guys, I got to be honest, I think this might be one of the episodes I'm most excited about. This could be.
You say that at the beginning of every one. You start with, guys, I got to be honest, as if you're lying to us the rest of the time. And then you're like, I'm the most excited about this.
And then when he pulls his question out, he's like, ooh, I really like this question that I wrote yesterday.
Well, and I do. It's true.
So what are we excited about? Tell us.
Today,
yes?
Audience, loving audience, fellow cast members, we're discussing modifying motorcycles. Why do you guys modify a motorcycle?
Modifying motorcycles.
Yeah, right. Modify.
Why do I particularly modify them?
No. It's entirely
you're getting you're getting ahead. Now, before we dive into this, just keep in mind there is going to be the podcast version of this video. You can check it out on Apple iTunes or wherever you get your podcast by typing in RevZilla. And we've gone a bit more in depth. We've got some interviews with some key figures in the motorcycle community, as well as we took some time to respond to viewers just like you, and we answered some of your questions, comments, and concerns around all things motorcycling.
And actually, not even just viewers just like you. For half a dozen of you, we literally responded directly
exactly
to you.
Like you.
All right. What are your go-to modifications up to and including building a whole motorcycle if necessary? Go.
I think it depends greatly on the motorcycle. Am I modifying a street bike, an off-road bike, an adventure bike? What am I trying to do with it? So I could sit here and give a list of modifications that I've done to various bikes, but I think it really depends on what bike we're talking about and what the intended purpose is. Suspension modification is number one. If it doesn't have a skid plate is going to be there, and then crash bars. I think one of the things that a lot of people forget are, radiator guards, stuff like that. One of the bikes that I've modified very heavily is my Triumph Bonneville. I have an 05 Bonneville, was my first bike. I've got like 80,000 miles on it now. And that bike has gone through phases. So like every 2 to 3 years, I feel like it completely changes. Like I hit a point where like after like 2 years, I'm like, okay, this has been fun. Now I'm going to rip it down and I'm going to turn it into something else.
That's the is bike finished?
No, it's never.
But everybody, that's the thing.
I don't want to jump ahead if you got a question down the road.
I don't think I do. But yeah, I think some people change them up constantly. Some people change them as they get tired with them, and then some people it's done and it's done. Never changes at all.
No, mine constantly keep rotating.
I think it is worth mentioning that you are generally over the size of what most normal motorcycle manufacturers assume the rider's going to be.
I think a lot of people are, though. I think
shaming?
you're the average.
Shaming.
I mean,
well, now I am. I wasn't before, but I mean, you're a tall dude and you're strong, so I think that.
By strong, you mean heavy. You're strong.
So
he's sturdy. He's very
You're
sturdy.
very sturdy, like a heavy tree.
A lot of these motorcycles come, with the suspension set up for somebody who's like 150 pounds or 160 pounds. So like, who is that? I don't.
It's not me.
That's not most Americans. So
no.
I think that maybe the motorcycle manufacturers are in cahoots with the aftermarket suspension companies, and they're like, yeah, we'll just put springs on for like a small child.
That's right, folks. High side, low side, where you can get all your tinfoil motorcycle hat theories verified.
I also think it's cool that like the Bonneville, like you said, you modify it depending on what you're going to do with it, and that sort of motorcycle, that standard type of motorcycle, really lends itself to being able to morph into what kind of stuff.
Well, I think it was funny because like I remember when it was probably about 6 years ago now. I was like, well, I want to get into adventure riding. Adventure riding was starting to take off, and I didn't have the money at the time to just go out and buy another motorcycle, and I didn't want to sell the Bonnie.
Did you say adventure riding was just starting to take off? I feel like that's been popular for a while.
No, but I mean, like 7 years ago was when it really the boom was really starting to kick in. Long way around had dropped at that point, and like it was becoming more commonplace. But I think for me, it was like, okay, I want to do this, but I didn't have the money at the time to just go out and buy another motorcycle. So the Bonneville was like, okay, well, I'll put knobby tires on that. I'll put a slightly higher bar setup on it, and like I'm not going to go anything crazy, but like I can get down a dirt road and see what this is all about.
Like a scrambler.
A scrambler. I scrambled it, yeah. But it was like you put a luggage rack on it, you put some soft bags on it, so if it falls over, it crashes on the bags. But I think that, to me, is what's exciting about motorcycles is that there is that aspect of you can change. Now, obviously, if I had an R6, it wouldn't have been the same thing.
There is a dude, isn't it? Dude went around the world on one.
There's a dude. There was the one that did a street triple R. They put knobbies on, and he turned into an off-road bike. And then there was one that did it with a Gixxer.
Yeah.
With I think it was a Gixxer 1000, and it was like he's just sitting there and cracking the throttle, and like it's just spinning the rear wheel. It's interesting.
That's awesome.
What about you? What are your mods?
Well, I think it really depends on the machine. I have all kinds of different bikes, and like you said, for modern off-road bikes, adventure and dirt, first things are skid plate and hand guards.
Hand guards. That's a
Yeah,
good one.
like hand guards.
I think you mentioned that earlier. Actually.
No, I don't think I did. I think I forgot hand guards, but I agree with that.
Falls-
Otherwise, you
falls
spend a
back.
fortune
Everybody
in
knows.
levers.
Right.
But for the old bikes, I really like to get into engine building and things like that. So my old Triumphs, if you took the engine out of my hardtail bike or the off-road bike that I had built, the two side by side on a workbench look exactly the same. They're based on a 650 parallel twin 4-speed carbureted bike. So the black and gold bike, since that's kind of my road racer, my sport bike, I guess you'd call it. That bike has aftermarket road racing cams in it. So that bike has been modified to make power up high. That bike really comes on about midway through the RPM range and then comes alive and it screams. And it's very, very fast once you get it up to speed. It's not really super gnarly, like right off the line. But whereas the other bike, the off-road bike, I had to build it to make power down low because that bike never really is screaming at any given point. It has to get out of the hole in a hurry. It has to come out of corners in a hurry. So that bike has a set of cams in it that move the power down low. So then that thing really is like a tractor. And where the other engine really starts to take off with the horsepower, the off-road bike starts to fall off a bit.
Yeah.
So it's pretty wild where if you looked at those two motors side by side, you would never be able to tell the difference. Sure. But you could, with the earlier bikes, I feel they're a lot easier to modify performance-wise based on what you're going to use them for.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think these modern engines, right? Like, I don't think you would open up like a brand new BMW S1000RR and be like, all right, well, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to make this, we're going to pull this thing a little more faster.
You wouldn't.
Yeah.
Kind of to your point, I'll modify a lot of different things for a lot of different reasons. I think to your point, the earlier bikes are a bit easier to modify. I think they're also a bit more in need of modification.
Yes.
Like you look at a modern motorcycle, and they got stuff figured out pretty well, right? And it's funny how much the OEMs have sort of taken from the aftermarket, the backyard people. Because they will play around. Look at how many different manufacturers have we seen that will have a few different flavors of an engine. Look at Triumph comes to mind with the Stripple, the R, the S, the RS.
But just look at their Tiger line. Their Tiger line is so differentiated now.
Well,
do you want a mag wheel? Do you want a
I just meant in terms
wheel?
I just meant in terms of the engine too.
Yeah,
but also to your point too that the bikes
the package you want.
Yeah, at this point it's all if somebody's really heavily modifying a bike at this point in time, not that that's not cool, but I do sometimes step back and say like, would you have been better off with a different motorcycle? Did you maybe pick up the wrong thing? I know you work with what you got.
No, but think about what you just said. So it's like when you look at the older bikes, like look at the Goldwing, for example. Like up until the Goldwing came out, like if you wanted a touring bike, you had to go out and buy a better fairing. You had to make yourself something. Now it's like you can literally just go through the OEM parts catalog and be like, I'll take that, and I've modified my motorcycle.
So I'm going to interrupt you because
we're
now moving into question two.
Question two.
Why are you doing this? Why are you modifying motorcycles? Why? Why are you guys doing this?
I guess for depending on what you're going to do with it. Like if, for instance, if I'm modifying my adventure bike for a big on-road tour, I'm going to put more road-oriented tires on it. I'm going to throw on my luggage racks and all that kind of stuff on it. But if I'm going to take it off-road, if I'm going to go off-road, I'm going to change the tires to ones that are way better off-road, but might not live as long on-road or handle as good on-road. Sure. So it depends on what you plan on using the bike for.
I think for me, the bike that I've been modifying the most lately is I bought like our viewers don't know this, but I bought a new KTM, a 350.
There it is.
A 350 EXCF.
All right.
10 minutes
and I bought the EXCF because it comes with a plate. It's a street legal bike, but I wanted the performance of something that was much more of the off-road focus. So bought the bike, changed the ECU on it, ripped out all the emission stuff on it. So it's a shell of sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But it's a shell of an EXCF, but underneath it's really just a woods bike. The biggest change that I just made to that was I had the suspension revalved, and the suspension was resprung when I bought the bike, so that was a great first step. But I was riding with my buddy Jeff. We went out to Colorado over the summer, and he made the offer of like switch bikes with me for this one trail and ride these bikes or ride my bike. And I made that mistake. I switched bikes, and he had his bike revalved, and I rode his bike, and I was like, oh my God, this has just cost me $1,200.
Tried
And I
to take
called
this little
Solid
test ride on
Performance, and I
buddy's
was
bike,
like,
yeah.
Evan, I need the Jeff Canary special. And he was like, absolutely. And he was more than happy to
Dude,
take my
he
money.
is
and
fast on the rocks. I can definitely tell that is worth it, because
Dude.
when we did we did Moonshine Enduro, which was very, very rocky, and he was getting away from me in the rocks because I haven't had mine revalved, and he was like, dude, that's everything.
Well,
'Cause
when
That's a great reason to modify a bike right there that I think you just touched on. Is right. I need to go faster. I'm not winning.
Yeah,
Right.
Well, I guess that was my long way of saying, like, why do you modify a bike? Like, for me with the dirt bike, it was to get the performance out of a street legal bike, but also increase my speed. The rocks is a big one for suspension mods.
It's tough because
like-
what the bike has to go through slow on gnarly rocks is so opposite of more flowy, fast stuff and hitting corners that aren't rocky. It's almost like the bike has to change its suspension settings, like, depending on what part of the enduro you're doing.
So I will also sort of kick in there too, all around the competition standpoint. I think you can modify a bike too to kind of help yourself compete better too, not just necessarily the bike. So one of the go-to modifications I'm making a lot of bikes, street or off-road, is seat. I'll change up the seat. Off-road, I like a comfortable seat so I can sit a lot. And that is obviously antithetical to going quickly for any of you who are actually riding off-road. But if I can plant my in the saddle and I'm kind of comfortable, it means it's less time that I'm spending standing up, and it's actually longer that I can keep the wheels turning because I'm not all worn out. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but you can if you can take your wallet out, you can buy your way into better performance. Like,
Don't
it doesn't
skip
all
leg
come
day,
from the
bro.
rock.
you gotta hit leg day in the gym, dude. It sounds like you're just not working those thighs out.
My point is, I do think that for most people, it's usually an inefficient expenditure of money to try and make the bike super fast if you don't have the skill. That having been said, you can buy your way out of a couple situations on a given bike or in a given scenario where you're not doing well.
I think that what I've learned time and time again is that there's no modification that's going to make you go faster, assuming you have some of the skill, than suspension modification. Like,
I would say tires are right up there too.
Time is the best
assuming
modification.
That's right.
you've
Yeah,
got
invest in
the
gasoline.
right tires on there.
Buy
but-
gas, use up, repeat.
But no, I think that that's what I've learned, because I've made such headway in rocks when we were at Seven Mountains and we had those rock garden options that we were doing. Like, I was blasting through there twice as fast as what I was doing before getting
Rocks
that
are tough
suspension
to
mod.
figure out.
So you guys are going, I think, sort of like the competition off-road side of things. So I will keep it lively and come at it from the street.
Okay, let's
and
go back. Yeah, we can come back to
non-competition,
street. Let's go back to street.
Method of doing things. So we had talked earlier about modifying motorcycles. There's times when I modify a motorcycle against my will, believe it or not. So like if I'm working with I'm serious. If I'm working with like an expensive antique, there are sometimes when I have to put a non-stock part on a motorcycle because I can't find or I can't afford the stock part, which is kind of interesting. And then I was also going to say too, like when we talk about modifying motorcycles right now, and I'm guessing most of our audience is probably this way, and you guys are probably like this to some degree or another. Maybe not so much you, but you're taking a whole motorcycle and you're taking a piece off of it and you're replacing it with a different piece that may be better, worse, different. It's not the same piece. I have a couple bikes I've built over the years. I have one in my garage right now that, like, the entire motorcycle practically is aftermarket parts, and I think it's what most people call a highly modified motorcycle, but it's really not. It's stock exactly the way I built it, but I didn't use any stock parts on it because they were expensive. I couldn't afford them, or I came across this, or a buddy gave me that. So there are some bikes where I've had something, and I think people think, oh, that's a modification. It's not a modification. It just never existed. Like I don't have a fender on one of my motorcycles. It's not a modification. I didn't pull a fender off. There was no provision to put a fender on there, so I didn't. It's not modified, but it is modified. If that makes any sense.
Well, if I, like what you're saying with that sort of stuff, like with my early bikes, part of getting performance out of early bikes was just getting the weight down. So if you look at our buds who have really stripped down shovel heads or even Triumphs or something like that, if you take the fenders off and put a smaller tank on it, smaller seat, take whatever, crash bars and lights and all that stuff, like I think that a lot of guys who have maybe an early Harley chopper, those bikes are coming in around maybe 400 pounds.
You might be a little heavier than that.
Yeah, but I mean, you figure
off.
what's a stock FLH, like 700 pounds.
93,000 pounds.
Right. So you take a motorcycle that's they're about 60, 65 horse or something like that at that point, and take 200 pounds off of it or something. You know what I mean? And then it really rips without even having to mess with the engine at all. So getting a better power to weight ratio is really what's fun about the early bikes, because you could take so much stuff off.
You guys are still talking about, like, and this is where we've been guilty of this for this entire question, is modifying for performance in some way or another. But I think that there's a lot of people out there that modify for better comfort on the street, and this goes back to what you were saying with the seat, right?
That was actually my next point. How many times have we stood there welding a tab or a bracket onto a frame and then climbing up on the workbench to sit and say, "Oh no, that's in the wrong spot. I got to cut that off and move it."
Yeah, even if it's just buying, even if it's a seat
or different
but like
bars,
I think about like like when you look at like modern motorcycles, like there's a reason that there's aftermarket seats, like you have gel seats and you've got comfort seats, and then a windshield, right?
Even
like
a car, you can the oldest, crappiest car, you can reach down and grab that bar and at least move closer or farther from the wheel and the pedals.
I think about longer distance touring, and adding a windshield to a bike is it's not necessarily something I do from an aesthetic standpoint, but if I have a naked sport bike or something like that, but if you put a little clip-on windshield on, just to keep the weight off your chest from the wind. Heated grips. The first time I added heated grips to a motorcycle, I was like, I don't really need these, but like, I mean, it's only an extra few bucks to have it added on.
Much.
So when I sold my Tiger and I got the 1090, I miss the heated grips so much.
Oh, they're so nice.
It's a luxury that you don't know you need until you have.
So soft.
So I think touring modifications is another big one that I've done in my day. Making the bike more comfortable for distance.
Something to be mentioned though is a bad windshield is way worse than.
I would rather have no windshield than a bad windshield. The one where it touches you and just buffets.
if you take off a bad windshield, have you just modified a modification?
Yes.
Well, honestly, like we have some.
But that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. The modifications never end. You keep modifying.
We have some windshield on our Street Glide here that somehow makes your head just like get completely bashed by the wind at any speed, like over 40 miles an hour. And there's been times where on that bike, I just want to snap it off and just like throw it.
But you riding that bike and me riding that bike,
it's just a couple of different.
I was just going to say, I don't have that problem. I think that's an interesting thing to bring up too, is that, and we say this a lot to people, we talk to customers, talk to friends, whatever. Some things work really well for some people and some just don't work well at all. It's just, this stuff is so highly subjective sometimes.
Are we jumping ahead to another question?
Well, we can actually.
I was afraid that what you were just saying there kind of parlayed into another question.
Well, we can segue into, I guess, sort of the next one. And this is like sort of the ugly reality, because I have a pile of like just parts everywhere that just didn't work well. So like, what are some of the downsides of modifying a motorcycle?
You never get the money back. You could modify
over $20,000 invested, bro.
You could I love those Craigslist ads where they're like modified and have all this stuff. And I'm like, well, that's great. I want that bike. I want none of those modifications because all the mods that you did for that, like, no desire.
They're very personal. So I think that when I'm looking for a used bike or even an older bike at this point, I try to find one that hasn't been messed with too much. The other thing going off of that is, if someone has changed the parts on the bike and they had been working on it over the past few years or whatever, there's chances they were in there messing with the wires and adding.
I love you pull the seat off and there's one color wire on there.
Oh, dude. Or if it's got different wheels on it, like maybe the wheel spacers are wrong. Like, it's just a can of worms. So if I see a bike that's visually obviously been modified, I know there's a lot of stuff that I can't see that I don't want to have to mess with.
So I'm gonna get super snobby for a moment here. I have pretty high standards for labor, and odds are good if I see an aftermarket or a different part installed on a motorcycle, I'm thinking to myself, whoever put that on probably didn't install it the way I want to see it installed.
Right.
So to me, it's almost evidence of a bike that has been with, for lack of a better term, and I don't necessarily want that. But I think there's other downsides too. For me, kind of coming back to that subjectivity from before, you could take a new motorcycle and you could change it up 16 different ways to Sunday and spend a bunch of money and have the highest quality install, and I might not like it well. I'll step back for a second to the FTR. Remember we had the FTR promotion. Don't get me wrong, I thought that bike looked really cool. I would have made almost none of those changes that we made to that bike were my own, just because those don't jive with the way I probably would have ridden that motorcycle.
Yeah.
And I think that's also like an excellent thing to realize, is that just because a modification is quote unquote bad for me doesn't mean that it's bad. It might be great for somebody, but there are just some things I don't want on a bike.
I think about how you guys modded the FTR, and what I loved about that bike so much is that it really did make for like a fun, naked sport touring bike. I know the fuel range, there were some people bitching about that.
Sport
but like,
touring bike, there was no bags on it.
But that's what I'm saying is I probably would have modified it with the bags. Like I probably would have figured, I would have probably looked at the catalog.
And that was where the high pipe bumped me. I was like, well, there's no bag going on there.
I think they had the touring option. So like same thing. Like I thought that when you guys were done with it, it looked really sharp. I really liked the way it looked. But if I was going to own that bike, I'd be like, oh well, cool. I can get 100 miles, before I have to pull over. I'm usually looking for 100 miles on sport bike touring trips anyway. There was some luggage options, get a little windshield for it. I'm like, that's how I would have used that bike. But no, I would agree with you on that.
I think something that we skipped over is gearing. Like something for me that is really advantageous of a chain drive over you could change the gear ratio on a belt drive, but it's a little bit more difficult, or a shaft drive is impossible. But gearing...
Possible, just expensive.
I just think that being able to change the gearing, if you go, up or down a tooth in the front, it makes a huge difference of where the bike sits on the tack when you're on the highway, or how it feels in the city.
Wait a second. That's not the question.
Well, kind of, yeah. I mean, but we're talking about downsides. Like, if the gearing is wrong, that is a downside.
What you're saying, I'm sorry, then I misunderstood you. So what you're saying is if somebody gears it to something that you don't want or you don't like.
You can gear a motorcycle points wrong.
Like my brother has some stunt bike or whatever, and it's got one of those giant pizza pie plate rear sprockets for so it's really easy to wheelie.
Right.
But it screams on the highway. You know what I mean? So that could be a drag if the stock gearing isn't included.
When I changed the stock gearing on the Tiger, and I geared it real low, so it was like a little bit easier off road. But then on the highway, I hated it, and it just I ended up going back because it wasn't that I ruined it. It was that the stock gearing was good enough off road. Right. And I preferred to be able to go back and forth easier with that bike. Where I want to leave that question off and just bring it back around, because I think one of the points that and I'm ready to let it go. But we've talked about modifications for each of these questions. We've talked about tires, and I think tires is a big one because a lot of people, especially in some of the off-road segments, they'll be like, I want those tires because they look super gnarly and that makes the bike look cooler.
Right.
And it does. Right. Until you try to turn in the rain and the bike is low siding across the highway.
Right. Yep. And if you don't like them, you're only going to have them on there for 3,200 miles. So it doesn't really matter anywho.
If you're lucky. There's some of those that are 1,800 miles and they're gone.
Right. What are some of the best or coolest modifications you've made to a bike? Again, I'll throw in there up to and including building a motorcycle, because I'm sure you may want to talk about that.
I had built a bike when I was running my own shop for a customer that really gave me a lot of
white bike.
Yeah, I mean, it really gave me a lot of creative freedom.
I hope we bring up some B-roll of that so everybody can see that.
Yeah, I mean,
that thing is killer.
It was just the woman who had hired me to build the bike really had kind of a loose vision of what she was after. It kind of had almost a bit of a drag racing cowl style rear, but she really wanted a prism style tank. And it was tough for me to kind of blend those styles of that sort of cowl rear that's usually round with this kind of crazy prism tank. And I'm like, well, I'll make a prism tail for it. And it really gave me a lot of creative freedom to design the tail from scratch. And I made cardboard templates, and I did all this math and divided the hexagonal cone shape for the rear. It was so much work went into just the tail. And there were days where I finished a prototype and just chucked it right in the trash, literally through 2 or 3 days of labor. You know what I mean? But at the end, man, the motor was killer. It was a 755 speed. It had no front brake, and it was a hardtail. Obviously not a very safe or practical motorcycle, but it came out really looking wild, and it was really fun to ride. It felt like a Schwinn Stingray that had 60 horsepower. So
that sounds safe and fun.
That was one of my favorite opportunities to modify a bike, was that particular one.
So the one that stands out in my mind is I had when I was working.
Maybe the Triumph. I know you love that bike. That's what I have my money on for what you were going to talk about.
It's a different Triumph.
Okay.
When I was working at the Triumph shop when I was living in Tennessee, there was a kid that came in and he had picked up a used mag wheel Bonnie. I think it was a 2012, and he was just starting to ride. It was going to be his second bike. He had already had a year on his first bike, and he liked the bike, but he wanted to make a bunch of changes to it, and he wanted it to be more like a speed triple. But he had never worked on a bike before. So he's like, listen, man, I'll buy this bike, but can you do all this stuff for me? So I was like, sure. So we bought the bike, brought it back to my house, and it was like, it wasn't anything monumental, but like he didn't have a lot of money to play with for certain things. So like instead of getting like a rear fender removal kit, like I built one. Like I went down to Home Depot, I got some roofing strips, and we actually put something together that worked really cool. Rewired all the electronics for the lights, put in a different exhaust, changed out the handlebars and made it more of a low slung bar, dropped the suspension a little bit. Like when it was done, like all said and done, I didn't want to give the bike over to him. Like I built, I wouldn't even say built, because like we didn't build I didn't build it. I heavily modified this bike for him. And when it was done, and I took it for like the test ride to make sure that it was ready for him to go, I was like, well, this bike is so much more fun than it is in stock form. I loved it.
For me, I mean, it would be like, heck, I think I've forgotten half the things I've done. I will say at this point in time, I actually try not to modify stuff. I'm atoning for past sins. I usually try and keep stuff pretty stock where I can. And if I do want to change something up, because I don't get me wrong, I love being in the garage farting around with something. I usually try and start with something that's either all aftermarket or too far gone, or like nobody's gonna be mad that I'm changing it up. But I think for me, usually the stuff that makes me happiest is stuff I've either made, like just worked out of steel and just I made something, or repurposed something that doesn't belong on there. Like my jockey knob on one of my bikes is off a boat. Like that obviously doesn't belong there, but that stuff like I had a buddy who made an air cleaner out of a pickle jar lid. Like it's I think whenever somebody takes either something that doesn't belong somewhere or trash and just repurposes it
like
into
my hummus container air cleaner for my race
yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
It worked. You kept the water out of it.
Exactly. Those are the ones I think that always kind of make me smile. Those are the ones I love seeing when I'm out somewhere. As far as like stuff I've seen too that other people have done, that almost makes me happier than I've done, because like it's not whatever, I'm a hack, but like there's some really talented people there. We talked, I think at some point we saw a guy who he built this shovel head Spurgeon, and he turned everything around, so it was all backwards. So the motor faced the other side of the bike, the trans faced the, and it looked kind of stock. Like it wasn't like a crazy like build that you wouldn't catch your eye unless, but like when it did, it like fish hooked you. You're like, what is that?
But I think that's like, those are some of the bikes and the mods that catch my eye the most, are the ones where it's not exactly, it's just different than what you would see in line at a bike show, or at a cool spot. Like you go down to like Deal's Gap or something like that, and my eyes always gravitate towards the bike where it's like some dude laid a ZX-10R down, they trashed it, and they built their own Street Fighter out of it, and it's got a Sapporo can for the radiator overflow taped around. Like that's the kind of stuff
you're saying a lot of bad words.
Sorry, but
a lot of beeps.
I think for me, like I get really stoked with some of the rat stuff that performs really well, but like it's just thrash. I know that's not your speed. I think
I think Street Fighters are rad.
I love that stuff,
I'm just saying, there's like a very fine line there between I took trash and made it cool, and I took trash and I put trash on my bike.
I understand that. I get that.
It's a tight.
But I've seen some that are really really well done, and it's neat to see how somebody can modify something that was previously wrecked, and they turn it into something that's pretty darn cool. I said darn.
Okay,
darn
so
cool.
we're moving into our
the kids.
What is potentially our last question here. I didn't know how we would work out on this time-wise, so this may be the last one. It may not. I'm not sure how long it's going to take. I actually want to kick off with a story in this, because I want to go first.
Should we lean back and like wait?
You could if you want.
We might go out of frame though. Make sure you stay.
The potential last question here is: what are some of the worst modifications you've made? I think again, a reality. Like, look, let's be honest. We work for RevZilla. We are selling aftermarket stuff, and we are trying to move as much of it as possible. But the truth is that, and we don't like emblazon this everywhere, but I think everyone kind of just knows it. Not everything we sell is necessarily super great for every rider, and there are sometimes you're going to do something that's just wrong. And
you regret it.
Never.
Right, exactly. And you're like, well, I should not have spent money on that. And I wanted to kick off the story, and you were actually reminding me of it before. I was like, oh, I'm going to tell a Joe story. I get to do this. One of the things I did at some point is I had this real cool hot rod shovel head I had put together, and I liked this bike. It was neat, and I had bought it, and I from a buddy who had done a lot of work to it, and then I was changing up a lot of things on it, and it was a neat bike. It was cool. It was fast, and so I thought, I'm gonna build me some cool kid handlebars. So I built a set of like rabbit ear style handlebars, and I really wanted that aggressive, fast look, So I built them things so like the grips were practically touching, and I was like, oh,
so you could ride away in handcuffs.
This is it. Like it feels fast, just sitting on the bench. So I weld them all up, whatever, throw a coat of paint on them, they look nice, and install all my hand controls, blah 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 blah, and jump on this thing.
How many rides did you take before you?
So I get everything all put together on it, and this bike was raked a little bit, and it had a little bit longer front end. Nothing nuts though. And I was going to, so I'm in the garage, take down off the lift, and I'm rolling it, backing it out, and so I jump on the bike, and as I do, the wheel flops like as they're wont to do, but I forgot how little leverage I had, and it just went whoop. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I can't even back up, and so I like literally rolled it 3 feet forward and started unbolting everything.
Dude, honestly,
wasn't even one full ride.
Yeah, no, not even. I didn't even start the bike.
That's funny. That actually reminds me of that iron head I was building. Before I started running my own shop, I had started building a 68 iron head, old Sportster, and I had put it in a Palco Swedish frame. It was like 4 up and 2 out, and raked out quite a bit. And I had built these really tall, skinny wheels for it. It was a 19 and a 21, no front brake, like a Cobra style seat.
Max, cool guy.
Yeah, I mean, it was a super duper cool guy bike, but it was just looking so killer. Like I built the pipes from scratch, the sissy bar, the seat, the gas tank, the oil tank, the bars. Like I built almost everything you could, within reason, without casting the engine or welding the frame together and stuff like that. I built the wheels. Same deal, little rabbit ear bars. And, like you do with your buds, when you finally get a mock-up bike down off the lift, you have them push you down the street on it because it doesn't run. Right, so I had my buddy run down the street with it, and holy hell, it felt like a death trap at like 4 miles an hour. And I was just like, dude, this might be the end of me.
Like those mini bikes we did. Your little mini bike, that thing is
dude. I was just thinking like
I've never felt so dangerous at 8 miles an hour.
I was thinking like this is going to be the last bike I ever ride. But sadly but sadly and gladly at the same time, when I started running my own shop, I had to sell that project to help fund get the bikes, the bike shop started. And I think the guy who bought the bike still has not finished it. So maybe somehow I could get that thing back.
Yeah.
Right. We'll see how it goes.
Well, let me know if you need handlebars for it. I can help you out.
My answer for this one is really simple. I've done a lot of stupid stuff, but I remember easily. I wanted to do the whole cool guy thing and take the front fender off of the T100, and I did that, and I was like, man, this looks cool. And then I took one ride in the rain. I was like, front fender is going right back on.
You got to ride off to the side.
So for all you people out there, they're like, man, I'm gonna take my front fender off and I'm gonna look cool. Don't do it.
Until you ride through a puddle of hot garbage.
I mean, unless you're riding, 1 hour out of the week on a beautiful sunny day, and even then you get a rock that kicks up or something like that. No.
I only own one motorcycle with a fender right now, and I gotta say, I fully support all of the things that are coming out of your all the things coming out of your mouth.
So that's something that I quickly reversed as far as modifications go.
Useful.
All right, so I think we got time. I think we do one really fast one. We'll try to squeeze one more in here, but it's got to be quick. And this is like, we're gonna get your cups out because I'm pouring out haterade.
No.
What are some of the modifications you've seen someone else make that make you cringe?
Car tires on motorcycles.
Ooh, that's a good one. That is a good one. It didn't even enter my brain. That is a great one.
That was something. When I worked in customer service, we had quite a few guys call in with maybe a VMAX or something like that were trying to put a big like Firestone car tire on the back, and we're like, dude, yeah, it looks cool and it hooks up, but you're not going to be able to turn.
I think that's a good one. I cringe every time I go on to Craigslist and I see Cafe Racer. It's like, oh, modified to be a cafe racer. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. And you click on it, and like their idea of like a cafe racer,
just a skateboard deck seat.
Well, either a skateboard deck seat or like they put these crazy like handlebars on it that they didn't do anything to change the foot pegs.
Right.
So now you're
So
just
you're
kind of
just like
like
in a pretzel.
you're sitting like this, and I'm like, that's not a
That's
cafe
the
racer.
Freedom Clam.
Oh man. So
Sock
yeah.
pegs with Clubman's is definitely.
The Clubbing bars does not a cafe racer make.
Turn them upside down. You don't buy the club and just turn them upside down. Turn the stockers right upside down. Take the L model handlebars.
Yeah, so that's mine. Is anytime I see cafe racer on Craigslist, I'm like, well, this is going to be either
Sometimes
beautiful,
they're really
either
done
beautiful
nicely, yeah.
or a complete disaster. There's no in between.
All right, I'm gonna finish this thing out. The one that kind of like makes me like a little bit is when I see a sprung saddle on a sprung motorcycle. And I'm sorry for anybody who has this setup. I just have never seen it once where it doesn't look like a belt and suspenders to me. it just doesn't ever look quite right. Right, exactly. Just a lot of cushion, really isolated from the roadway there.
I like wearing my belts.
What
and
if you
suspenders
have
at
a
the same
sprung
time.
hub? What if you have an old Triumph sprung hub on a rigid frame with the sprung seat? Is that too many springs for you?
A sprung hub with a sprung seat might look okay.
That's how
The
they were from the
springs
factory.
Yeah, they might. Yeah, they might look okay. Like they're far enough apart. I don't know why that works.
I think whether or
very,
not the
very
factory is making the right bike is a whole separate conversation, right? Like, because it came from the
I'm
factory
talking
that
about
way.
a 13-inch shock that is
Right.
8 inches away from a 4-inch clothespin. Okay, so I think that
There would be no need to modify any motorcycle if the factory nailed it every time.
Yeah, you're right.
Just killed it. So I am actually really eager. I got to be honest with you guys. I'm really eager to round this one out because now you guys are going to take over and you are going to drop some comments in here. This is where I'm going to go buck wild, and I actually can't wait until the episode where we're discussing the responses to this episode.
Because keep in mind, in the podcast version of this, we go in and we answer a lot of the questions and responses that you're throwing in there. We discuss them, we talk about them, and there's also all those additional interviews that you get to check out with notable characters in the motorcycle industry. So make sure you're checking out the podcast form.
You read my mind. You parlayed that
I know.
right into the end of this
I'm
thing.
looking them right in the eye. Check out the podcast. Download it. Type in RevZilla.
All right, you guys know the drill. This has been High Side, Low Side. That's Spurgie. This is Joe. I'm Lem, and we're out of here.